I'm glad you're watching today. I want to talk to you about how to talk to your kids about why bad things happen. Now, I know for a fact that you don't want to talk about that. Do you? I don't think you do. I don't either. None of us wants to admit bad things even happen, and we sure don't want to have to talk about them. But there's a reality. Your child one day is going to get acne. I know it's hard to imagine, but they will. Or they're going to be bullied, or have a car wreck, or, God forbid, cut themselves, or lose a family member to cancer. And in those moments, I promise you from experience, look at all these wrinkles on my forehead, this experience, you want to be their number one go-to. You want to be their mentor in those moments. So when the crucial conversation occurs, here's how to talk to your kids about when bad things happen. My name's Paul Basden. I'm one of the senior pastors at Preston Trail Community Church in Frisco, Texas, north of Dallas. And Jim Johnson, my co-pastor, and I are talking about a dozen topics or so that we think parents and kids are having important conversations about these days. In this particular video, we're going to explore how to talk to your kids about why bad things happen. And I guarantee you this is going to be practical, and I hope it will be also wise. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. I was married at the age of 22. No, I did not know everything about marriage. We just got married. 43 years later, we're still married. We had our first baby at 25, and she was precious. Little girl who wrapped me around her finger the first time I held her. And pretty soon we said, hey, let's have number two. This was such a great experience. Let's have baby number two. So Denise got pregnant. She had a normal pregnancy for 9 full months until the due date. And on March 25th, 1984, Jason Jeffrey, only little boy I would ever have, was born dead. It's called stillborn, but it should be called deadborn because you don't get to bring a baby home from the hospital. Of course, there was a 2-year-old waiting at home, Carrie, and I had to tell her something. I will tell you that was the hardest conversation I ever had, and that was the first time I ever experienced how to tell a child about when bad things happen. And here's what I said to her. I took her outside. It was a spring day, warm in Central Texas, and we sat out there, and she was in my lap, and she goes, Daddy, when's Mommy coming home? I said, well, she'll be home in a day or two. And she said, when's Mommy bringing home the little baby, and is it a boy or a girl? And I'd asked the doctor what to say, and he gave me some great wisdom for this scenario. I said, well, Carrie, it was a little boy, and we don't know yet what we're going to name him, but we're not going to be bringing him home. And her eyes got big as saucers, and she said, why? And of course, I was trying to fight back the tears. I didn't want to pass on my emotional angst to her, but how could I hide it? And I said, well, Dr. Gloff said to us this. He said, Paul, Denise, if a baby can't live in a mother's womb, which is the safest place in the world for it, it probably won't be able to live outside the womb either. And Carrie, I know those are words that don't make a lot of sense, but Jason died as he was being born right before, and so we're not going to be able to bring him home. Hardest conversation I ever had on that subject, but it gave me wisdom to be able to speak to you today. So let's talk to you about how to talk to your kids about hard things. Here's the first thing. Be sure and lay a good groundwork, a good foundation for them. Remind them that life is filled with tons of good things and, yes, some bad things. In the Old Testament, we read this in the Bible from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. For everything there's a season and a time for every activity under heaven. For any of you who have grandparents that are rockers, you will remember that the Byrds did that. You probably heard it yourself. Great combination. To everything, turn, turn, turn. And it's nice to say that theoretically, but we really want life to be only good. Most likely, if you got your vote, life would be only good. But that's not reality. In fact, you want a good definition of reality? I think you said yes. Here's the answer. Reality is what you have to adjust to because it will not adjust to you. So help your kids with these expectations. Life is not always, excitement. There are thrills and chills, but there are true spills, and help your kid know that that's going to come at some point. Second, tell your child that God is good. I hope you lead them in that prayer. God is great. God is good. Talk to them about being both, but help them understand that God is good. That means that God is not the cause of any bad things. That is, God does not send evil and suffering. God does not traffic in evil and suffering. How do we know that? Well, first we know it because Jesus is the very face of God. Someone has said that if you want to know what God is like, take a long look at Jesus. And Jesus is the best man who ever lived. He is truly good. So if that's what God is like, then we know God is good. Now, this can be hard to accept. I have a younger daughter who has a very odd genetic disease, and she was born with it. We weren't aware of it initially, but in time, certain things in her life didn't work well, especially some of her bones and her connective tissue. And she's had a lot of suffering. And to be honest, it's hard for me to accept sometimes that God is good when she suffers in those ways. But I've been really encouraged by a book Philip Yancey wrote, and he talks about the good friend of his, George. And George had a wife that had gone through cancer treatment, and George had been hit by a drunk driver in the car he was driving, and it knocked out one of his daughters in terms of her health and just messed up their entire family. And so when Phil Yancey went to interview him one time, he said, "Tell me something, George. Aren't you bitter with God? Aren't you angry with God? Aren't you ticked off at God?" And George said, "Hey, Philip, not at all." And Phil said, "Why?" I said, "Because I don't confuse God with life." I just want you to pause a minute on that. I don't confuse God with life. Help your kids know that when bad things happen, that's not God, that's life in a sinful world. Jesus' brother James said in the letter he wrote in the New Testament, chapter 1, verse 16, "God does not tempt with evil, and he cannot be tempted by evil. In fact, every good and perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights." And in another letter in the New Testament, 1 John 1:5, it says, "God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all." So listen to your kids' questions. Be patient with them, but they're going to be asking about, is God good? Can God be trusted? And you have to help them understand that he is. Third, tell them that God can use bad things for good purposes. Doesn't mean God causes those things, but it does mean that God is so redemptive and so powerful that he can use bad things for good purposes. God didn't cause the evil, but he is so powerful, he's so creative that he can use the evil he didn't cause for his good purposes. There's a woman I work with in our church staff named Allison. She had cancer as a child, and she struggled often with wondering whether or not God had stricken her or whether she was so displeasing to God. And over the years, her faith really waxed and waned and was up and it was down. But by the grace of God, he was so faithful and so good to her that he has redeemed that cancer. And even today, she sometimes walks with a limp. But you know what? She is a pastor of birth through 18 in our church. She's our next gen pastor. Why? Because she trusted God to take even the bad things in her life and do something good with them. Fourth, tell your kids that bad things won't last forever. If your kids are younger, you know that they love happy endings. And here's a true happy ending, and it is that Jesus one day will return to earth. And one day, as Revelation says, there'll be no more pain, no more suffering, no more death, no more bad things. Truly, at that time, only good things. Now, my suggestion is that these are 4 foundational things you can use as you talk to your kids about why bad things happen. I'm sure you can expand on those. But thank you for watching today. I hope what I said was, as I promised it would be, helpful, and as I hoped it would be, wise. And be sure to subscribe to this station if you want to be notified when we post more content. And if you want to check out the book Jim Johnson and I wrote with this information in here, and much deeper treatment, be sure and check out Tough Stuff Parenting wherever you buy your books. Thanks. Have a great day.